Besides disfiguring the facts, science has been badly attacked, as I said. And in fact, it's very clear that the GMO, the pro-GMO forces, whether they're scientists or not, even the scientists have been subverting science, because the most fundamental precept of science is that the facts must be honored and honestly communicated. The facts must be honored and honestly communicated. And no matter what somebody's scientific degree or what the pedigree of a scientific organization is, that person or that organization cannot represent science if it is consistently misrepresenting the facts. There's just so great a conflict there, they can't coexist. And unfortunately, that's been happening. Just to drive home the importance of adherence to the facts on the part of scientists is a quote from Jacob Bernowski, an eminent scientist and historian of science, in his very influential book, Science and Human Values, emphasized, the science must conform to the facts. The sanction of truth is an exact boundary which encloses him. And Bernowski went on to stress that it's essential for scientists to cultivate what he called the habit of truth. But unfortunately, too many scientists who are advocating genetic engineering and GMOs have fallen into the habit of distorting the truth. And it's a bad habit. Now, one of the foundational falsehoods that is propagated by the scientific community is the claim of scientific consensus. You probably all heard it. The claim that there's an overwhelming consensus within the scientific community that genetically engineered foods are just as safe, if not safer, than conventionally produced foods. And indeed, this consensus is purported to be at least as strong as the scientific consensus that there is global warming occurring and that human activity is playing a significant role in it. But where there always has been a very strong and genuine scientific consensus in the case of global warming and the role of human activity in causing it, there has not been a similar consensus when it comes to GMOs. And several respected scientific organizations and scientists have, from the beginning of the whole venture till the present, issued cautions, criticized the weakness of the regulation, and stood up for it, often against quite a bit of attack from the proponents. Now, in fact, some of these claims about consensus are really bold and absolute. For instance, in 2012, the Board of Directors of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, one of the premier scientific organizations, issued a statement in support of genetically engineered foods, in which they claimed that every respected organization that has reviewed the data has concluded that genetically engineered foods are just as safe, no riskier than their conventionally produced counterparts. But that is a flat-out false statement. And it's surprising they could make it and get away with it because, for one thing, in 2001, Canada's National Academy of Science, the Royal Society of Canada, released a major report in which two of the main conclusions were, one, the default prediction for each GE food should be that the genetic alteration has induced unintended and potentially harmful side effects, and B, it is scientifically unjustifiable to regard a GE food as safe unless its safety has been established through a course of testing that is far more rigorous than any regulators were then requiring or that any have yet to require. Okay, for one thing, they called not only for extensive long-term animal testing, little of which has been done. But then, after that, human clinical trials, and there haven't been any of those. Other respected groups that have expressed concerns include the British Medical Association, the editors of The Lancet, a premier medical journal, and in one of their opinion pieces, they stated, there are good reasons to believe that specific risks may exist, and they also stated, government should have never have allowed these products into the food chain without insisting on rigorous testing for effects on health. Now, in 2015, more than 300 scientists signed a statement asserting that there is not a consensus within the scientific community about safety, and that the safety of genetically engineered foods has not been adequately demonstrated. The Public Health Association of Australia, which is that nation's premier non-governmental health association, beginning in 2000, began to release cautionary reports and statements on GMOs and critiques of the way they were being regulated. And most recently in 2016, that association called for an immediate and indefinite freeze on the commercial growing and the importation of GE crops until their safety has been established via long-term testing conducted independently of the manufacturers, something that has not yet happened and is unlikely to happen. Also, interestingly, the scientists on the Biotechnology Task Force of the US Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, are among the groups of scientists who have not signed on, are not part of the claimed consensus that these foods do not entail unique risks. In fact, as was mentioned in the introduction, a lawsuit that I initiated against the FDA in 1998 forced that agency to divulge its files on genetically engineered food. And that basically unearthed memo after memo from the FDA's own scientific experts that have been asked to study the issue, and those memos warned about the risks. In fact, they were stating essentially what the experts that released the Canadian report stated, because that is the solid scientific understanding when one understands how disruptive, potentially disruptive, the genetic engineering process is and the risks that it imposes. Those scientists warned about the risks, called for rigorous safety testing, and the extent of the concern among the scientific staff of the FDA and the degree of consensus is evidenced by a memo that was written by an FDA compliance officer, Dr. Linda Call, sent to the biotechnology coordinator in 1992. She had been reviewing all the memos, all the input from the scientists, and here's what she stated. The processes of genetic engineering and traditional breeding are different, and according to the technical experts in the agency, they lead to different risks. Now, she didn't say, you know, there's some debate here going on, and some of the scientists have concerns. You wouldn't know. She just said, according to the technical experts, because that was the pervasive opinion. That was that's what you see when you read the memos, as I have. Also, quite interestingly, the FDA's biotechnology coordinator had written a few months before that, had written a letter to a Canadian health official admitting that there was not a consensus about the safety of genetically engineered foods in the general scientific community outside the FDA either. So the FDA administrators knew that within their own ranks, their scientists solidly had concluded that genetic engineering entails abnormal risks and that each food has to be carefully tested, and it knew that there was not a consensus about safety in the scientific community at large. That didn't stop them from going ahead and basically allowing these foods on the market in violation not only of sound science, but in violation of US food safety law, which actually presumes that these foods such as GMOs are unsafe until demonstrated safe through standard scientific procedures. And you might ask, well, why would they do that? Why would they ignore their own scientists? Well, because beginning in 1986 with the presidential administration of Ronald Reagan and continuing through every subsequent federal administration, Republican or Democrat, the FDA and the other federal executive agencies in the US have been following a policy to promote biotechnology and to help ease the introduction of its products onto domestic and foreign markets. And the FDA has admitted in writing that it has a policy to promote biotechnology. So with that conflict of interest, it's a little less surprising that they ignored their own scientists. And here's what the FDA claimed in its official policy statement on genetically engineered foods, issued in May of 1992, but still in effect. This is still the FDA's official stance on genetically engineered foods. The agency, and it stated, among other things, the agency is not aware of any information showing that foods derived by these new methods differ from other foods in any meaningful or uniform way, or that, as a class, foods developed by the new techniques present any different or greater safety concern that foods developed by traditional plant breeding. An outright lie. I mean, they're not aware of any information. Their files are loaded with information for their own scientists. So this is the kind of deception that is being dished out on behalf of genetic engineering. And if the lawsuit had not been instigated, we wouldn't really know the extent to which that's a fraudulent statement. We wouldn't know what the FDA's own scientists had said.